If we want robots to be good for society, then we need to humanize them.
So this is just a comment real press. Often the whole...
Yeah, I'm Ken Salisbury. I'm faculty in computer science at Stanford University. My main focus has been in the design of robotic devices or haptic devices for controlling robots. I mean, this lab has evolved over the years. Rapid prototyping has completely changed the way we do robotics. We have a lot of 3D printers. We have a laser cutter which cuts wooden patterns out. I love it because it smells good. It sort of smells like a campfire. Early in my grad student career, I was at a NASA lab, and one of the robots, which was a remotely controlled robot, broke a sensor wire, and the arm at the shoulder started spinning around and around and around and around. It was almost like a cartoon. But it finally broke the mechanical parts, and in the end, the arm was just sort of dangling by the wires. It's like a very strong effect on me. And I was, I was worried about the damage, and I was worried about fire and all the things you might worry about. But there's another part of me that kind of worries about how did it feel about that? Is it reflecting on that? There was a DARPA competition some years ago, and it was a simulation of robots going into the Fukushima nuclear plant. And had they been able to turn a certain valve or close a certain switch, they could have reduced the damage that was done. So there were dozens of mostly biped robots who went into the competition, and they had to climb the stairs and open the door and turn the valve. And very few robots succeeded in that. And there were many, many instances where you'd see the robot standing on the steps and teetering back and forth, and everybody's going, "Can you make it?" And then many of them would just fall and crash on the ground, and you feel really bad, not just for the robot, however you do that, but also for the team. I still know the robot is code and motors and human design in it, but as it starts to have its own thoughts, I think there's potential for anxiety about it. Is it feeling okay because it's behaving this way? As we start to attribute intelligence to the emerging AIs, we may start worrying about them as well. I guess I kind of go back to WALL-E, where suspension of disbelief was allowed there. So you could feel inspired by WALL-E, finding a flower and taking care of it, or his relationship with the female robot. You could really get emotionally engaged in that. It's not hard to distance yourself from that because it's a script and it's an animator. But as robots become real, I'd like to see them to be gracious, whatever that means, because I think that might be infectious. What's the vocabulary of grace? I don't know what that is yet.
I'm Kevin Kuhl, Senior Editor at Stanford Graduate School of Business. What Ken said about the emotional connection we develop with robots, it made me think about the rush of innovation we're wrestling with today in artificial intelligence, robotics, automation. It's one thing to think about how smart these machines can be, but what about their feelings? Do they even have feelings? Is it possible for a robot to feel pain? We may never know the answer to those questions, but our experience interacting with robots suggests that they do have the power to make us feel. As robots continue to show up in so many parts of our lives, what role will emotions play in how we perceive them? And what are the implications of that? This is If, Then, a podcast from Stanford Graduate School of Business, where we explore some of the most interesting complexities of modern life and what we need to do to get where we want to be. Today, we speak with Szu-chi Huang. She's Associate Professor of Marketing at Stanford Graduate School of Business.
I have no problem setting goals. I have many goals in life, but I find myself procrastinating or coming up with a plan that's not feasible and end up giving up. So that makes me want to understand this science more. What is motivation and what get people to get started to do something and what get them to finish?
We'll examine her pioneering work on the impact of robots on human behavior and their effects on our motivation to help others. Dr. Huang's research challenges many assumptions about the influence robots have on us. Will they help us be better people or chip away at our basic humanity? Each episode looks at a topic through the lens of an if-then statement. Professor Huang's is, if we want robots to be good for society, then we need to humanize them. Now, you've said yourself that you're very much drawn to sort of real world situations and you like doing field experiments. And your robot study seems to me to be particularly novel. But why, first of all, why field experiments? And how did you land on robots?
I think field experiments are important, especially for motivation research, because we know that a biggest dilemma people have is that they say they want to do something and they don't do it. So if I just capture intentions online in a survey, everybody's going to look great on paper. Everybody say they are going to study and work out and eat healthy. But if I capture real behavior, I start to see gaps in their behavior. They may say one thing and do another thing. And that's why field experiments are very informative for me to capture those gaps, study them, and find solutions to help people overcome them. So for the robot study, how we kind of have that idea was several years ago, we started to observe that technology is getting developed everywhere. And one important domain is disaster response, because disaster response is where a lot of money is being invested into, because government agencies and organizations and companies all want robots that can help to put out fire, clean hospitals, deal with earthquakes. And so governments are putting a lot of investment into these technologies. So we thought it would be important to kind of understand the social impact of these disaster response robots. And that's where we kind of started looking into this and finding something interesting. Mm-hmm. Then COVID happens, which gave us even more opportunities to study these disaster response robots used specifically during COVID and see how that affects our behavior.
And you mentioned that you were studying prosocial behavior and how that was affected. What do you mean by that?
So prosocial motivation, the way we think about it is the motivation to do something good for others. So motivation could be doing something good for myself, so such as working out for my health. But prosocial motivation means I'm investing resources, which could be time, money, my ability to help somebody else. And that's what we call prosocial motivation. And so it is a type of motivation. It is, again, a dilemma for people. We all say we want to help others. And oftentimes we actually don't do it. And that's where we want to find, are there factors that make us more prosocial or less prosocial?
And describe, if you will, how you designed this experiment, what you were asking the study participants to do, and what the context was.
So in a lot of our experiments, what we did is we let people watch different news reports or read different news stories that we drafted. And in these news stories or news reports, we will talk about a disaster that just happened somewhere. So it could be the pandemic, it could be the earthquake that happened in Africa. And then we guide people through kind of what happened in the disaster, how many people were injured, what was the damage. Then we introduce our heroes. So the heroes were either human or they were robots. And in both cases, we explain in detail what those heroes were doing. And so you may imagine that you see news stories like this everywhere and every day. So in the hero human story, we'll talk about how humans were dragging the survivors out of the ruins. And in contrast, in the robot hero stories, we talk about how different kinds of robots were dragging humans and survivors out of the ruins. So the actions are exactly the same, but the heroes are different.
And then how were you then measuring the responses or the behavior of the study participants?
So after people watch the news stories, sometimes we just capture how they feel at the moment. Sometimes we capture intentions. So how likely are you to help somebody right now? And in some studies, we actually introduce a time lapse. So we let people do other things. So they kind of forget about the news stories. And then as they leave the space, leave the lab, we introduce a prosocial campaign. For instance, we are running a donation drive for local communities to help children in the neighborhood. And we invite them to donate. And this is where we actually capture people's donation behavior and see if there's a difference depending on the news story that they watched earlier.
And it turned out that watching the robots do their work wasn't particularly inspiring to people.
Yes, turns out hero robots did not work that well. So watching the robot stories actually make people feel less inspired and less encouraged. And that has important consequences, such as making them donate much less than the people who watch the human heroes.
So there was kind of like a backlash effect.
Yes,
almost.
Definitely.
They were less inclined.
Yes. And that's why we believe this is an important effect to document, because all these YouTube videos about hero robots are everywhere. We are watching them every day. And if it lowers our prosocial motivation and our intention to help others, it could have a pretty big negative social impact.
So what's the answer if we know we're going to be interacting with robots and considering them partners or helpers or even heroes? Then how can we change what seems to be an inclination to not be inspired by those robots?
Yes. So we spent pretty much the second half of our project really looking into this because we want to find solutions. We cannot tell media not to discuss any robot stories, so it will go out there. But are there solutions to help people think about robots differently? One coherent theme we have found so far is that it is really helpful to humanize those robots. So the reason why robots are not encouraging is because we believe that they are not vulnerable. They are not actually taking on risk when they run into ruins to help people or when they put up fires. Whereas human heroes, we know they were vulnerable and they were taking on risk. And those things are what make a person's behavior inspiring. So when we highlight how robots can be vulnerable as well, such as their chip can get burned out during a disaster response or a rescue, and they literally can die, basically cannot be used again, then we found that knowing that the robots actually did contribute to a disaster response turned out to be more inspiring than if we don't introduce those information. So I would say thinking about ways to humanize robots will be a very effective solution.
You used the word vulnerable. What do you mean by that?
So in some examples we tested, we highlight how, for instance, the materials we use to build robots can be used one time. And that will mean that the robot as an entity has only one shot of doing this. And they're doing this to save somebody. And after this, in some way, they are sacrificing themselves because their materials or their chips, which is their thought center, will not be able to get used again. And when we highlight that, then in some way, we introduce the concept of mortality into robots' existence. And that definitely makes people feel that these behaviors are more noble and inspiring than a robot that will never take on any risk, and rescuing somebody from earthquake is just a daily job for them.
So in your study, were these robots just sort of machines that were anonymous and nameless and so on?
Yes. We tried different looks of robots. Some actually look more like human, have a little bit legs and hands going on. Some literally looks like an airplane or a box. So you would say some is more machine look and some might potentially be more human look. But we never name them and we never describe their behavior as human behavior. We never describe their vulnerability or their ability to make decisions, which is something unique to human as well. And what we found is when we build in those traits, when we highlight how vulnerable they are or they have autonomy, they are making a decision to do this right now, then that makes their actions more inspiring.
So if it had a name, like we know from Hollywood movies, for example, there are lots of robots. Some of them, the Terminator is fearsome and terrible. WALL-E, the trash collecting robot is lovable and lonely, and we identify with WALL-E. But they have names and they almost have personalities. So is that part of what you're getting at, that when you say humanize the robots, you want to give them characteristics and attributes that make them human-like?
Exactly. I think these things are important, and naming them could be the great place to start. Like you say, different naming, different look, and different personalities signal that they are indeed individuals, and they have will, and they could get hurt, and all these things make them more like us, make them more human.
So Arnold Schwarzenegger in the first Terminator is terrible. He's just this relentless killing machine. But then in the sequel, he's there to save the little boy who's the future of humanity. And there is a feeling of sadness when the Terminator in that movie is taking the bullets, if you will, and then sacrifices himself at the end. So Hollywood seems to understand at some level that we're going to identify with robots in scary, difficult, dangerous situations. Is it possible that we could borrow from some of the techniques that they use, some of the storytelling that they are doing?
Definitely. And I think you provided an excellent example. What they did in the second movie is they first built a relationship between this robot and human. And by building this relationship, now we start to see the robot more as a human. And then when he actually made the sacrifice, we feel inspired and we feel touched by it. If he was still just a cold machine, we wouldn't feel anything. A lot of machines got blown away in Hollywood movies. We never shed a tear for them. But because now he has a relationship with human, we start to see him as a human being as well. Then his sacrifice is noble.
This is If Then, a podcast from Stanford Graduate School of Business, where we explore some of the most interesting complexities of modern life and what we need to do to get where we want to be. I'm Kevin Kuhl, and I'm speaking with Szu-chi Huang, Associate Professor of Marketing at the GSB. We'll be right back with Professor Huang after a quick break. Coming up, we'll hear how companies are responding to her robot research, and we'll also find out what most people get wrong about setting goals. Stay with us. So let's talk about this notion of agency or autonomy. One of the fears we have about artificial intelligence generally is that it's going to be too, quote unquote, smart, that it's going to take our jobs, it's going to supplant work that we're doing now, it will destroy humanity in the worst case scenario. And yet, what's suggested in the study and what you're describing now suggests that maybe we want our robots to have some sense of agency. Is that right?
Yes. And I would say one way to think about this is to kind of tap into what relationship should robots, machines, and humans have. In one of the solutions we tested, we actually created the robot-human hybrid team because that's the reality. Robots rarely work alone. Humans these days don't work alone either. We work with technology. So when we highlight that it is a team of robots and humans, how we talk about that relationship becomes critical. We can say that the relationship is very hierarchical, so humans control the robots, or we can say the relationship is very equal, so robots and humans are equal partners. We jointly do computations and make decisions together and conquer this obstacle together. And we found that the equal relationship, really thinking about them as partners who jointly make decisions with us, is the one that makes them more human. And that is the one that actually turned out to be the most effective to help people feel inspired by their action.
Right. And to some degree, and you use this phrase in your analysis, in your study, it's the illusion of autonomy, right? I mean, the robots aren't literally sort of autonomous and making decisions on their own, but it's reframing that whole situation and how we think about them.
Yes. Although some people would say that robots indeed have the soul and the will, but the reality is, of course, a lot of the machines and robots that's being launched and being used right now do not really have true autonomy like how we think about humans have. But it is about framing and kind of highlighting their ability to compute and to make decisions. Just like humans, we do our cost-benefit analysis and we make decisions. So by highlighting those similarities, we could make them more humanized, even though they are not fully functioning like a human.
One of my favorite robots as a kid was Rosie the Maid for the Jetsons, right? And she was like a member of the family and everything. Well, if I have Rosie in my house cleaning off the dishes after dinner, I'm probably not going to get up and help Rosie. But there's sort of a social cost if a human is doing that and I'm not helping, right? I mean, I'm going to feel like a jerk if I do that. Is there a point at which we will become conditioned to the work that robots do in a way that will change how that motivation might work?
Very interesting question. I think I am an optimist when it comes to this. So instead of the possibility of outsourcing all the helps to robots and humans end up just not being prosocial at all, I would like to think about it as we outsource some work to robots, leaving other work that are more suitable for human to do to us. And so if Rosie is cleaning the house and we start to see her as a member of the family and humanize her, then hopefully you still feel encouraged to do other things for family, such as taking out the trash, because now Rosie is working alone if you don't help. So my hope is that by rethinking our relationship with robots and rethinking what they really are and how they contribute to our lives, we can continue to be prosocial, and we can use that energy for tasks that are specifically designed for humans to do or something we are better at.
You used rescue or hero robots in particular because they were doing something quote unquote dangerous. Why don't we just assume that robots are going to take on the dangerous stuff and we don't have to worry about that? So why is it important that they would inspire us to do it?
I think there are tasks that robots are better at, such as running into danger. By adopting robots, we can reduce the cost on humans. And I think those things we should outsource for robots to do. My interest here is that by knowing that robots are doing those work, it's reducing our humanity. And there are many things actually humans have to organize and do and help. And those are the things that we don't want to see reduced. And therefore, we want to help people rethink the relationship with robots and what mindset they should have when they watch these interesting, amazing news stories about robot heroes so that they can actually still be an active contributor in their community, because there are many things only they can do. So definitely, I think these news and these clips are very exciting. It prompts a lot of sharing, so they're going to have very broad impact. But what are people going to think after they watch it is the critical part. If millions of people watch it and their prosociality reduce by even 20%, that's a huge loss for our society. And in addition, from the videos, we see a lot of opportunities to make things more human. Like you pointed out, can we give it names? Can we use different shapes so that they look more like human or at least animals? And so there are many opportunities that exist in the design of the robots and in how we promote and talk about them.
And is that work happening now, or is there a recognition that that should be part of the design and the development of robots?
I think every time I share this research work, which is very new, companies resonate with this finding. A lot of times they have to fight internally because internally there might be two voices. One is to make it more human. The other is to make it more perfect. And a lot of times perfection suggests that it should look less like human, more like the future. And therefore, hopefully our research findings help one side win this argument and they can start making all these disaster response robots more human. Some marketers think that making them more human will be more relatable. And some marketing teams may think that highlighting their capability is better because we always want to create more competitive and more excellent products. So instead of making them sound like us, we should make them sound like something that never existed. And so both could be appealing positions. But our data show that there is one that helps the rest of the society be more prosocial. And that's the one I will vote on.
Let's pivot a little bit to talk about other kinds of motivation and goal setting. Obviously, the work that you're doing with robots has a particular context, but a lot of your work about motivation has to do with how we set a goal, maintain that goal once we've achieved it. What do people get wrong about thinking about what motivates them or other people?
I think one coherent theme I've repeatedly found in my research is that people thought setting a goal and working on a goal is a static process. So if I have a goal, I have my workout routine, I just keep on doing that for 3 months and I'm going to achieve my goal. But from my research, I found that goal pursuit there's nothing static about goal pursuit. The whole process is dynamic. What that means is you today and you 3 months later is going to be a very different person. And that person needs a very different set of tools. So thinking about goal pursuit as a dynamic process allows us to reset and update our goals, change how we approach our goals, change who we want to pull in or distance ourselves from so we can be successful at our goals. And that's the most important message I want everybody to know about when it comes to thinking about their goal, is to keep it dynamic for yourself and for your stakeholders.
Do other people motivate us most of the time? In other words, if we see, and this goes back a little bit to the thinking around how you designed the robot experiment, when we see someone doing something that we want to emulate, that can be motivation. There are also situations where seeing that may have the opposite effect. Is that right?
That is true. In our work, we found that other people in our lives and in our network can either be supporters or collaborators, or they could become almost like competitors. In a set of Weight Watchers data, we found that Weight Watchers, they actually starting off feeling more friendly with the fellow members. So they feel that other people in the program are their supporters and friends and support them through this journey. But as they lose more weight and become more successful, they start to feel more distant from other members because other members start to become a benchmark for them to compare against. The interesting thing is that in both cases, both types of relationships can be motivating. It's really about how we think about it. The supporters can be motivating because they help us feel that the goal is indeed feasible. If many people are doing it, must be doable, I can do it too. The competition can be motivating as well because they give us something to achieve and give us some pressure not to fall behind. But it's about managing that relationship and recognizing that relationship does shift as you become more successful and accomplish more of your goal. It's helpful for people to actually use the network the way they see fit.
Admittedly, it's an odd thought that we need to humanize robots to keep ourselves more human. Understanding how robots influence our behavior will be increasingly important as they play a larger and larger role in our daily lives. So perhaps the key here isn't only that humanizing robots will help us preserve our best selves, but that we need to be comfortable having an emotional connection to a robot. We may feel sadness when a robot on a rescue mission is damaged, but should we also feel gratitude? Or maybe we should feel gratitude to its creator. In every robot we see, we find the work of thousands of people advancing this technology so that it can be helpful to us. In that broken spinning arm we heard about earlier, we not only see the failure of the robot, but that of the many humans who designed, programmed, and built it. By humanizing robots, perhaps we not only learn to accept them, but to appreciate the work of our fellow humans who make them possible.
The whole, how 3D printers make on the shaft or bearing to fit correctly, you need to post-process.
If Then is produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Newsom of Magnificent Noise for Stanford Graduate School of Business. Our show is produced by Jim Colgan and Julian Natt. Mixing and sound design by Kristen Muller. From Stanford GSB, Jenny Luna, Sorrel Husbands-Denholtz, and Elizabeth Wylezik-Stern. If you enjoyed this conversation, we'd appreciate you sharing this with others who might be interested and hope you'll try some of the other episodes in this series. For more on our professors and their research, or to discover more podcasts coming out of Stanford GSB, visit our website at gsb.stanford.edu. Find more on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media at Stanford GSB. I'm Kevin Kuhl.